When I set out to make my YouTube channel, I did so with the intention of being able to discuss some of my favorite games with others, so I could share games that you might not have played. Well, Atelier Iris 2 is one of those games, and while I know this is a niche series, it's also one that's pretty close to me. So welcome, for the very first time, to my Atelier Retrospective.
出会いとともに始まって終わることを忘れた物語君をいつかたどり着ける光あふれる約束の場所
Before we get into the game itself, I want to put a disclaimer. There will be story spoilers, and so you can hit the timestamp in the description when we get there. I'd also like to start with my introduction to this series. I was at a point in gaming that I'd never been before. At this point, the PS3 had been out for a while, and yet I didn't own one. And for most of my life at this point, I'd been playing games like Final Fantasy, Resident Evil, and Legend of Zelda. And while these franchises were heavy hitters, in 2010 they were not producing the level of quality they once had in my eyes, with games like Resident Evil 5 going more action, Final Fantasy 13 kind of being a boring slog to me, and the Zelda franchise not making a new game since 2006 even though Skyward Sword was announced. I needed something different, something out of my comfort zone. So I went to a local GameStop and began browsing. During this time, the PS2 games were starting to be phased out and being put in smaller sections, and I made my way to one of those bins marked 20 or less. Sifting through these games, I found games that would change my gaming life forever. Games I'd never heard of. These games were Atelier Iris 1, 2, and Persona 3 and 4. I picked up these games, looked at the covers front and back, and thought they looked pretty cool, only to then put them down and walk out the store. It took me a few visits to different GameStops and seeing these games over and over to finally purchase them. And with these 4 games, my views on JRPGs opened to a whole new world. No longer was I limited to Final Fantasy. I had brand new worlds to explore, new characters to fall in love with, and new stories to experience. Little did I know that these games would start a new obsession within me of collecting limited editions, soundtracks, art books, and more. 2010 was a big year for me. My wife and I were living on our own for the very first time. No roommates, no parents. We were expecting our first baby, and I had started a new job. With all these new experiences, it was only fitting that these 4 games would be a new experience as well. Atelier Iris 2 started it all. And the minute I put the game in my PS2, I was excited to see an anime intro for the game. The music was fitting as well and reminded me of when I played Tales of the Abyss and Symphonia. This very game captured the essence of what I've been searching for, and then there was the gameplay. At its core, Atelier Iris 2 plays similarly to other JRPGs, with its exploration, random encounters, and combat. But these are all surface level comparisons. The main gameplay is split into different sections. You have the main gameplay that you're familiar with, such as exploration, combat, and the like, with characters such as Felt, who is one of the two main heroes of this story. Felt embodies everything that you would find in most JRPGs, and because of this, it makes the game very inviting for players who are used to games such as Final Fantasy, Star Ocean, or Dragon Quest. The other portion of this game revolves around Vise and her alchemy. Vise's alchemy sections are used to be able to create new items that Felt can use on his journey. The alchemy sections might sound boring at first, but it quickly becomes obsessive as you try to collect all the recipes to create some of the best items and accessories in the game. On top of the collective side, these sections also act as a way to expand the story, as both characters have their own experiences. And not only that, the game allows you to switch between the two characters as you please. These two elements combine into a harmony that offers you a level of gameplay that isn't seen in many games, or even in this franchise, as this is the only game in the Atelier series that does this. I've spoken to different fans of the franchise, and while I always recommend newcomers to start at this game, other fans, specifically long-term ones, don't, and I can't understand why. Most of the time, their reasoning behind this is because the game is not a good representation of what the series as a whole is like. And I think that's the point. The biggest complaint I've heard is that this game and the trilogy has a heavy focus on action. And yet to me, that's what plays in its favor. If I had to start playing these games on, say, even the first Atelier Iris, I may not have continued the series. And this is heavily due to the fact that the game is more action and story focused. It was this that bred familiarity with me, and why I always say this is a good starting point to the series. Traversing on the maps is also not like your typical RPGs. There isn't a traditional overworld like you would see with Final Fantasy or even the first Atelier Iris. Instead, the map is done with points where you move your character to. This kind of layout helps with progression, making things a lot more streamlined than your traditional overworld. This type of map layout helps tremendously with the alchemy mechanic, as you have to go to these different locations to collect the materials needed to create items or improve recipes or weapons. This also negates the need for fast travel, as you can go to any location you want after it's been unlocked. Backtracking is also encouraged, as you can explore more of the map as you create more items, such as bombs that open each section further. This type of map design and exploration is something that has been a staple in Atelier games ever since, and is still used today in newer entries, though heavily improved upon. Weapons are also handled differently than your typical RPG. Here, weapons have a skill tree, and you can improve the weapon your character has by using the materials required. The weapons themselves also have different branching paths that have different stats and abilities, and it is encouraged to go through each path to learn all the skills for the character as you master each skill on the weapon paths. Combat is also different yet familiar. Just like most RPGs at the time, you have random encounters, yet you don't. As you explore each area, you have an encounter gauge. This gauge will change from blue to green to yellow and to red, with red meaning an encounter is imminent. After defeating the enemies, the gauge starts to deplete, and once empty, you no longer have to worry about encounters in that portion of the area as long as you don't return to the overworld. During combat, it plays like you expect a JRPG to play, except here the combat offers so much more. Every character has the same core options: a charge attack, which you use a basic attack to add to the party's charge meter. A break attack, which is used to push enemies back to the orange section of the active cost time battle bar, or ACTB for short. The ability to use items, a skill section, defend, and flee are all there. Both Felt and Vise have their own special ability since they are alchemists. This is the ability to use mana synthesis. Using mana synthesis allows you to make battle items during combat at the cost of no materials, and instead you use elemental mana that you gather from exploration and defeating enemies with felt. This is a game changer as it gives you heals or attacks with very little cost. Now, I've mentioned two things here, the ACTB bar and the charge meter. So it's only fitting we discuss this more, as these are really important to understanding combat. The ACTB is where your turns and enemy turns are determined. A few things come into play here. The speed of the characters play a big role in how quickly your characters get their turns. On top of that, break attacks will play a big role in how much damage you can do to enemies. Hitting an enemy with a break attack will push their turn back, and if you hit them back into the orange bar in the ACTB, you'll put them into a break status. While they're broken, you're able to combo attack and deal more damage. The more damage you do, the more experience points you can obtain. This type of element in a game can change how you approach combat, as the system can be very rewarding. This gives you the opportunity to completely control the encounter as well as level your characters at a much faster rate. The charge meter acts as your team's mana pool, similar to how Super Mario RPG has its flower points the party shares. As you use charge attacks, the meter fills. Each of your character's skills use a predetermined number of charge points, so using this effectively can be crucial to controlling combat. Run out and you're left vulnerable while you fill it back up. Using a good balance between charge and break attacks will be key to having a smooth time in this game. Now, I did forget one more part of combat: switching. The game has a total of 6 playable characters, and switching becomes available the moment you have 4 of those characters. In combat, you can switch your members with those not currently in combat. You can use this as a strategy to switch to a healer or tank character to prevent a bad outcome. If you do switch, then the character that is brought in can act immediately as if it was their normal turn. Doing things like this can help avoid a potential game over, which sucks as the bosses become more and more difficult. As the theme of this game is alchemy and creation, being creative in combat is highly encouraged. Music in this game is honestly nothing to write home about. It fits the game and doesn't really offer anything that sticks with you like a Zelda or Persona song would. And it's not like the music is bad, but instead it's more like it serves its purpose and that's it. This is honestly how the series is as a whole, though some games do it better than others. And it's about that time where we start talking about the story. So here is the obligatory spoiler warning. If you've not played this and don't want to be spoiled, then you can skip to the timestamp in the description. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that the story is the most engaging story to grace gaming. So if you're looking for Final Fantasy levels of storytelling, then this isn't it. But I will tell you, the story is good enough to keep you engaged, especially with its addictive nature of gameplay. The story, in all honesty, is pretty unique to the series as a whole and plays out similarly to its cousins, the Artanelico games. But that's enough of the intro. Let's get to the actual story. The game starts you off in control of Vize. She's just completed her apprenticeship and is now a full-fledged alchemist. And in celebration of this, her mentor Cruz gives Vize 2 share rings, which is said to have mysterious powers. He suggests she gives one to someone close to her. Vize immediately thinks of Felt, as the two of them are childhood friends who also live together. So off she goes to look for him. It's here the game gives us some very nice and quick world building. It's established early on that creatures with elemental powers live in this world. These creatures are called mana, and in order for Vize to be able to use alchemy, she needs to make a pact with these various mana elementals. And while different creatures can be found in the land below of Belkaid, it is here in Eden that the mana predominantly reside. This, of course, is what kicks off the game. Vize finds Felt hanging out at the Belkaid gate, and we are introduced to our second protagonist. Felt, like Vize, studied alchemy, but found it boring, so he never graduated. Instead, he dreamed of adventure and what lay beyond the Belkaid gate. The two decide to go to the nearby forest so Vize can make a pact with the wood mana Dower. As they venture into the forest, they run into a sword that is set in the middle of a stone area. This is the Azure Azoth, a mythical sword that is the guardian of Eden and can only be pulled out and wielded by a chosen person. This is very similar to the Master Sword in Zelda. Of course, Felt tries to pull the sword out, and of course it doesn't budge. So the two continue to make their way to Dower. After making a successful pact, the land begins to quake, and we see various landmarks vanish from Eden. To make matters worse, monsters begin to appear. As they escape, Felt begins to hear a voice. The voice leads him to the Azoth, where he is able to pull it from its slumber. The sword is alive and infused with the same mana that inhabits the land. Felt is directed to travel to Belkite in order to save Eden by a woman who appears to us as a projection.
I wonder what's happening.
Before Felt leaves on his journey, we, as Vise, need to craft a heal herb for Felt to take on his journey. And as we give Felt the heal herb, Vise also gives Felt one of the share rings, showing her love for him. Though, of course, he is oblivious to it. And with that, Felt goes through the Belkite Gate, and we get the introduction to Atelier Iris 2. This type of prologue is a good way to start this game. It not only introduces us to these two protagonists, but it gives us a look into the Atelier series, as one of the first actions we do is to craft an item. This prologue also sets up the understanding that we will be playing as both protagonists, even if we aren't made fully aware of it until after Felt's first chapter, which we now get into after the introduction plays. I should also note that Atelier Iris 2 takes place chronologically over 100 years before the first game, making this a prequel to the original game. Felt arrives in a desert, and we now take control of him in typical RPG fashion. As we explore this area, Felt becomes overheated and dehydrated as he's never encountered a desert before. This leads to him fainting, and as he lays passed out in the sand, some characters pass by, mocking him. One of these characters will be important for later though. This moment does two things here. It shows Felt's inexperience in a world outside of his pampered life, and it shows how dangerous and cruel this world is. Felt wakes up in a tent, and finds that he's been rescued and taken care of by a woman named Noin. It is through Noin that Felt learns of a war raging on in Belkite. Belkite is split into two factions, the oppressive Silveresta Empire and the rebel faction trying to liberate Belkite that Noin belongs to. A pretty straight, simplistic premise, I know. One that we've seen time and time again in RPGs. Felt agrees to travel and help Noin as she saved his life. With Noin in our party, we make our way to our first dungeon, the Desert Ruins. As we enter the node, we see Imperial troops along with the man who mocked Felt before. This is Chaos, and he will be the main antagonist for this game. After he leaves, we head inside the ruins. This is a small dungeon and exploration is pretty easy. At the end, we have a quick encounter with Imperial troops. After their defeat, the same woman from before appears, informing Felt that he needs to go to the Altina church. Why she couldn't just say that the first time, I have no idea, but with new direction, Felt and Noin continue on. On their way to the church, they discover more information regarding the share rings. These rings allow the wearer to communicate and send items to one another. This leads us to the next part of our gameplay. Now the game lets us take control of Vise again, and as Vise we investigate the share ring to help Felt on his journey. During Vise's gameplay sections, we encounter most of our alchemy. Vise also sees a girl who turns out to be the character the game is named after, Iris. Vise researches the share ring, and this leads her to making a pact with the metal mana. Her sections don't have any combat, being in the Holy Land and all. Instead, she is limited to just exploration, collection, and world building. In the Great Cave, on her way to make a pact, she runs into Iris again, which is kind of weird because only those with permission are allowed in. Vise insists that Iris joins her as the place is dangerous, even though there are no monsters around. As she approaches the metal mana Zulvelk, he denies her request, only to change his mind when he notices the share ring. He becomes impressed that Vise was able to decode the ancient text regarding the ring. After making the pact, Vise and Iris head out, only for Iris to leave her company. Throughout the entire time, Vise has been followed by a crazy wood mana fairy named Poe. I haven't mentioned him till now as he is more important to Felt's journey. Kind of. And for now, all he does is drool over Vise's beauty. Back at the workshop, Vise, with the Metal Mana's help, is able to activate the share ring. She successfully connects with Felt, and now we can make items using materials Felt finds. Vise writes a letter informing Felt of what's going on, along with a craft for him to use in combat. This also gives us, the player, the ability to switch between Felt and Vise. The game makes this easy to keep track of by showing us on the save screen who we need to keep playing as to progress the story. Back in control of Felt, we continue our journey. And as we head to West Seth Rogen, we notice we are being followed. Once we make it to Seth Rogen, we are introduced to a new set of antagonists, Theodore and Galahad. Though Galahad seems more of a duty-bound character and not really a villain. Having to find another way around, we need to find a way to sneak into the lighthouse. And to do that, we need to get a flower from Eden for a kid in the park who knows where the secret entrance is. And if there's one thing this game does well, it's showing us how to get used to the mechanics, because now we need to go back to control Vise. Using the power of alchemy, we make an item called Wonder Grow, which helps us to make plants grow instantly. She uses the Wonder Grow on the plants where it makes the flowers we are looking for. At this moment, Vise also does a task to help the water mana and forms a new pact. Back with Felt, we give the flower to the kid, which I don't know how the flower hasn't melted yet since it's made of ice, but we'll give it the benefit of the doubt because alchemy. Once the kid has a flower, we now have access to the lighthouse. Just like all the dungeons in this game, they are very small and linear, but exploration is highly recommended as you can find useful items in alchemy recipes. And I guess now would be a good time to talk about the big drawback to this game. Atelier Iris 2 has this problem where it will make you backtrack to past dungeons and places on the map to acquire items. And while backtracking is not a bad thing per se, it isn't done well here. In most games, backtracking is optional. You do it because you want to be able to access secrets you couldn't before to acquire more powerful items and weapons, but it's always optional. In Atelier Iris 2, most of these instances are not optional. You need to find alchemy recipes in some cases to progress, and a lot of these will be locked until you have other items to aid in your exploration, such as a grappling hook or bombs. The biggest problem here is that items you use for exploration are one-time use, so you need to make a bunch of them to be able to always have them on hand. The other issue with this is that when you find these places where you have to use a more powerful bomb, grappling hook, or other exploration items, you won't remember to go back to these places later unless you were taking notes while playing the game. I remember there was a specific moment towards the end of this game where I was stuck because I missed a recipe and I had to look up a guide to find the alchemy recipes I missed. As much as I loved playing this game, this was something that really bothered me as I could not progress until I found this recipe. Once we make our way through the sewers and into the lighthouse, we are able to rescue Noin's ally Max. This also gives us a look at the game's humor. Noin and Felt burst into the jail cell, with Noin showing excitement for finding Max, saying, "Max! And other friends," making itself pretty aware of the fact that the other two characters are unimportant NPCs. We also see Max calling Felt Feel instead, and Felt promptly correcting him. This is a recurring gag that these two will go through. After the rescue, Max gives Felt an item that allows us to use what's called secret factors in our items. These secret factors give us the ability to permanently learn skills from equipped weapons and accessories. This is where grinding becomes encouraged, as the game is not difficult to where it becomes necessary to level grind. Instead, this acts as a sort of completionist bonus. As we leave the lighthouse, our party is formally introduced to Chaos, and here we learn that Chaos knows about the Azor Azoth. After a brief battle, the party makes their way out and temporarily splits up. Felt heads out to Seth Rogen. Who came up with this name of this town? I have no idea, because it's the most ridiculous name a town could have. It's seriously taken me about an hour to pronounce this right. Regenbogen. Felt is interrupted by a mysterious girl in white that has been following us, and a battle ensues. During the fight, she says the Azoth must be destroyed. But before we could find out more information as to what's going on, she flees after we beat her down like a little pain in the... Felt meets back up with Noin and Max, and they continue on their way. We get a scene of Theodore scolding Chaos and Galahad for allowing Felt and his allies to escape. Chaos, not giving a damn about Theodore, leaves the room. And as he's by himself now, he begins talking to a mysterious voice about the Azure Azoth. With the party entering Agito Cove, this marks chapter 5, and trust me when I say this is still the beginning of the game. If we switch to Vise at this point, she gets a side quest to make a pact with a new mana. Since most of Vise's playtime is similar to this, I won't be mentioning her much unless it pertains to the main story. In order for Felt to continue his journey, he needs to collect some cotton cloth. Unfortunately, the vendor in Titalia is sold out. But thankfully, she directs us to where we can gather some Titalia cotton to make the cloth. The Great Desert. In the desert, Felt encounters strong enemies, and when it looks as if he's being overwhelmed, he's rescued by a giant man-dragon thing named Gray. After the battle, Gray joins our party simply because he's bored. Once a cotton cloth has been made, we head back to Agito Cove, where we find out that Gray is an acquaintance of Max and his team. We also get more of the game's humor, where we find out Noin is a terrible cook, though this seems to be a JRPG and anime trope. After being temporarily poisoned by Noin, Felt and Gray head to find the blacksmith to help repair the ship. This leads us to one of the Atelier Series' main recurring characters, Haggle. Haggle, as a blacksmith, now gives us the ability to upgrade our weapons, adding more depth to the crafting gameplay. Now when we camp, there's an anvil where we can perform the upgrades. Upgrading the weapons gives us new abilities on top of our stat upgrades. Returning to the camp, Haggle begins the repairs. Noin also rejoins the party, and they head out to sea, beginning chapter 6. As the party continues to Altina Church, they find the girl in white who had been following Felt. She is lying on the floor unconscious and poisoned. Wanting to save her life, the party returns with her to Max's camp. Now we need to find a strong medicine to be able to help her, and so we need Vise to make a cure jar. Once used on the girl, she wakes up. Felt questions her about destroying the Azoth, with her reply saying that the Crimson Azoth must be destroyed to save the world. Felt's Azoth interjects, stating that he is the Azure Azoth, and agrees that the Crimson Azoth should be destroyed. He then explains that he is from Eden and the Crimson Azoth is the one from this land of Belkaid. Insisting that they need to have this cleared up, he tells the party that she should join them on their way to Altina Church. The girl agrees and introduces herself. Her name is Fee. Honestly, at this point, all these names feel like a second grader came up with them. We now have our fourth party member. Well, kind of, because Noin leaves us again to go help Max. Fee is an interesting party member. She has high speed as well as AoE on her charge and break attacks. This comes at the cost of her having low HP and defenses, but the trade-off is pretty good. Her skills are also flashy and hit multiple times, with many of them having short wait times. Before reaching the church, the party decides to rest at the camp, and Felt and Fee go off on their own to take a moment to enjoy the sights. But Chaos shows up and decides to piss all over their bowl of cereal. We enter combat with him, and we are hopelessly defeated. I mean, it wouldn't be a JRPG if you didn't have a boss fight you couldn't win. Chaos berates Felt and demands to know the location of something called the Gardo. Felt has no idea what the Gardo is, but it's alluded to be something to do with Eden. Before Chaos can deliver the final blow to Felt and Fee, Gray shows up. Chaos at this point shows that he's intimidated by Gray, making us wonder if there's more to this dragon man person thing that has been with us. Gray overpowers Chaos, and the Crimson Azoth acknowledges Gray's fighting ability. After the battle, Felt feels, reading these two words together is weird, he feels humiliated by this defeat, and the Azure Azoth tells him he's too weak and should only run when he encounters Chaos. This puts a new determination in Felt, however. At the Altina Church, we meet the High Priestess Aislinn. As the head of the church, she confirms that the Azoth Felt has is the Azure one, and now invites the party to learn of the history of Belkaid. We move past some murals on the wall and are told that these depict a great alchemy war. This war ravaged the lands and caused great suffering. And as a result of this war, the church was created. The church acts as a keeper of the knowledge that was left behind. Island gives us the history on the Azoth. According to the history, the Azure and Crimson Azoth were created using alchemy, but the power they wielded was too destructive as they destroyed an entire continent. The vast lake that Felt and Chaos fought nearby was created in the wake of the Azoths. Since the power of the Crimson Azoth was too immense, the alchemist created Yulvaria, the girl we saw earlier in the game. She is in charge of the Gardo Continental Drive, which is what keeps Eden and Belkide separate. This was created to prevent the Crimson Azoth from creating destruction again. But because the Gardo was damaged, Eden and Belkide have once again been connected. In order for Felt to fix the Gardo, he must find the different workshops and repair them. With this, Fee joins as a permanent member of the party. Back in Eden, Poe realizes that Vise is in love with Felt and runs off, accidentally entering Belkide. On the other side, he is thrown into a workshop and accidentally breaking it further. He finds a recipe on the floor and then is captured by some unknown party. Now in Chapter 9, Felt and his party run into Poe and his captors, who turn out to be a gang of Poonies, basically the weakest enemies in the game. They tell Felt that they will release Poe if Felt and the party help them with the task. Felt doesn't care too much at the first, but changes his mind after seeing Poe has an alchemy recipe. Once freed, Poe joins the party and is the last member for a good while. It is now a race to find the workshops before Chaos finds the Gardo and brings Eden to Belkide. Chapter 10 chronicles these events of this journey, and, the party fails. These chapters are basically the filler episodes of the game, not really progressing the story much, but instead focusing on the characters. So here's a breakdown of the characters' stories while you watch some filler gameplay. During this time, we learn that Galahad is Noin's father, and that because of the death of Noin's mother, there is a rift between the two. Noin blames her father for the death of her mother, while Galahad also blames himself, carrying this immense weight that Noin doesn't understand. And remember that sense of duty that I mentioned before? Well, it turns out that Galahad isn't too fond of Theodore, and actively puts himself on the line to make sure the Imperials don't cause too much destruction. In order to do this, he is constantly giving his troops orders that go against Theodore's own orders. Chaos, as it turns out, has a sister, and his sister had suffered an illness that caused her death. Since his sister was all he had, he took to looking into ways to bring her back. This led him to uncovering his past about his ancestors and how they were a group of alchemists left behind on Belkide when Eden was split from the world. Poe is just Poe. But he shows a form of kindness, and by this I mean overly flirting, to the merchant cat lady from the beginning of the game. She becomes fixated on Poe and starts to pursue him like he had been Vise. Gray, being the strongest party member, used to train at a place called Dragon's Lair. He would hunt dragons and constantly look for stronger foes to challenge, which is how he got the nickname Dragon Slayer. He did this so often that he became cursed and took the form of a dragon. Fee, well, her story's coming next, so let's get back to the story. We learn the true story of the Azoths. It turns out that these weapons created with alchemy are not exactly that. The Crimson Azoth was actually created by the most renowned alchemist in the world, Palaxius. The Azure Azoth, on the other hand, was created by the alchemist's pupil, who had turned out to be the most talented alchemist, Elismus. And in seeing the destructive nature of the Crimson Azoth and his teacher's decline to madness, he created the Azure Azoth. Using the Azure Azoth, he fought his master, and in a reverse Anakin versus Obi-Wan way, he stopped his master and sealed him in the Crimson Azoth. And in fear of his master one day returning, Elismus sealed his own essence into the Azure Azoth. The party makes their way to an Imperial camp, where they encounter Galahad. During this fight, they learn that Gray and Galahad used to be students together and were good friends. This is also where we learn of the relationship between Noin and her father. The strain in their relationship is why Noin joined the rebels in the first place. After the encounter with Galahad, the party continues their journey to find the workshops. They soon find out that the rebels are attacking one of the Empire's fortresses. So Felt decides to help as they find out the fortress is less guarded since Galahad is elsewhere. And as they successfully overtake the fortress, the celebration is short-lived as Chaos arrives. He quickly dispatches of the rebels, but is stopped as Felt and the party show up. Before they can fight, however, Max arrives and shows his true power to Chaos.
Chaos!
I didn't expect to find you among them. What? A challenge from an amateur asseteer?
No, let me handle this.
Max?
Or am I too pathetic for the lightning blade?
Very well. I shall enjoy crushing Simsilt once and for all. Ready? Is that all? I've had enough.
Oh, that didn't work. How about this?
That looked just like Fee's attack.
In an act of desperation, Chaos unleashes the power of the Crimson Azoth, which begins to petrify Max. Felt and his party intervene. This fight is much easier this time around, maybe because Felt and everyone are stronger, or Chaos is tired from his fight with Max. To add on top of this, Fee activates a new ability she did not know she had, and she performs the same ability as Max. The something Zex Claw. Seriously, these names are weird sometimes.
I already told you, you can't possibly beat me.
Please, Spotty, you must move.
You too possess the Slake family move, Ein Zexclaw.
I'm Zexclaw.
Felt, this is your chance.
Felt, just remember that it was luck that won this battle for you.
After the fight, Chaos flees. As Max begins to turn to stone, he reveals that Fee is his long-lost sister, and the two of them are heirs to the royal throne. They had been separated when Fee was younger, and Max had been looking for her, which is why she was able to perform the ability that only their family knows. Felt, now convinced that Chaos must be stopped, and that he's the only one with the power to do so, goes after Chaos on his own. Once he catches up to Chaos, the two battle it out, with Chaos overpowering Felt. And just like with Max, Chaos turns Felt into stone. With Felt out of the way, Chaos is able to destroy the Gardo and open the doorway from Eden to Belkaid. Time passes, and back at Eden, Vise is getting worried about Felt, as she's not heard from him in weeks. Determined to find out what's going on, she decides to go to Belkaid herself. Vise retraces Felt's footsteps and eventually runs into the party. And with their help, Vise is able to synthesize a Mel Orb, which reverses the effects of the petrification on Max and Felt. The party, now together, head to Altina Church, where they find out that Chaos had been successful in bringing Eden to Belkaid. On top of that, it turns out that Chaos had captured Iris, as she is the reincarnation of Lilith. And with Iris captured, he can take control of her powers to control all of creation. Here, everything is revealed about Chaos and the Crimson Azoth, giving us the rest of the story that was withheld from us. Palaxius, the alchemist teacher who went mad, created the Crimson Azoth with the intention of controlling all of Lilith's power. Chaos, being the descendant of the alchemists left in Belkaid when Eden was separated, was the perfect candidate for Palaxius to use for his goals. Manipulating Chaos using his grief over his sister, Palaxius takes control over Chaos's body and uses his power combined with the Crimson Azoth to use the Exonosis spell to petrify all of Eden. Once this happens, the Temple of Creation emerges, and Felt and the party must go and stop Palaxius once and for all. The boss fight against Palaxius is the most difficult fight in the game, but because it's a one and done fight, unlike most JRPGs where the boss has multiple forms, you don't have to save healing items and such for another fight. Defeating Palaxius, Chaos regains control over himself and pleads for Felt to destroy the crystal in the Crimson Azoth.
Did we do it? What? No, that's...
Felt, use the crystal!
Chaos!
Don't worry about me! Keep using the crystal!
Ah, this is it!
Felt, this is the final stroke. I shall release all the power of the crystal to put an end to Palaxius.
Illusmus?
I am honored to have met such diligent alchemists at the end. I was able to reaffirm my belief that alchemy is about helping people.
Illusmus.
I am sorry. The life you saved must be sacrificed so soon. Now, my master, we must depart. This world no longer has a use for us. Cast aside this power and learn what true alchemy is.
Felt immediately attacks it, prompting Illusmus, the Azure Azoth, to speak up, letting Felt know he will be putting all his power to destroy his mentor. Illusmus thanks Felt for restoring his faith that alchemy can live on in alchemists like Felt and Vise. Illusmus sacrifices himself and both Azoths explode. Mana is then restored to Belkide, and Iris is freed. The world begins to flourish, and we now see the epilogue as the ending music plays. In the epilogue, we see Noin has now made up with her father, and they are living happily together. Fee has taken over her duties as leader of the people along with her brother Max. Gray has now stepped up and become a mentor and trains the people of the world. Poe and the cat merchant, I really don't remember her name, end up together. Chaos finally makes peace with his sister's passing as he visits her grave. And Felt, Vise, and Iris return home, with the three of them living together, and Felt and Vise raising Iris as their own. It's your typical happily ever after story, but because it's a prequel to the first game, it doesn't really leave too much open for anything but a happy ending. Not to mention, this game series doesn't usually have very thought-provoking endings. It's hard to think that I first played this game 13 years ago, and it's harder to think I haven't played it since. So now that I've revisited this game after all this time, how do I feel? To be honest, I still love this game, though its flaws do show more after all this time. The game's difficulty or lack thereof, for example, is something that I would have liked to have seen done better. The game basically requires no grinding and very little strategy. You can break this game very easily through the alchemy system, which is something that continues through the different games. And the fact that my characters are around level 40 when finishing this game kinda shows this. The combat, while having a lot of interesting concepts, doesn't really have a lot of moments to fully utilize this. The break system is amazing when used, but it's rarely necessary as most enemies go down in 1 to 2 hits. Not to mention the bosses are fairly resistant to breaks. The special attacks are flashy but really unnecessary. Most of the time I use them just to use them, not because I needed to. The voice acting though is decent enough, even by today's standards. There weren't any cringeworthy moments outside of Poe, but he's the comic relief, so that's somewhat forgivable. Chaos though was the obvious standout, being voiced by Liam O'Brien, who has voiced some major roles in many other games and media such as Akihiko in Persona 3, Gaara in Naruto, and many other games. He also voiced many characters for a good number of Atelier games moving forward, such as the Mana Khemia, Artanelico, and Sturk in the Atelier Arlen trilogy. So this being one of his earlier roles in gaming, he absolutely nailed his performance. Playing this game 13 years later feels kind of weird, As I mentioned, when I bought this game and played it for the first time, I was entering a new phase in my life. My wife and I moved into a new place, just the two of us. I started a new job. We were expecting a baby, and we had a 1-year-old dog named Zelda, who I missed terribly as she passed away over 2 years ago from this video. Now 13 years later, I'm at a new transition in my life. And almost as if I went full circle, here we are. My wife and I bought our first house. I started a new job. Funny enough, I'm back at the company I was working for when I started playing this game all those years ago. I have a 1-year-old dog who reminds me of Zelda every day. And as of writing this script, my wife and I found out we're having our third baby. And maybe it's all these feelings in my life that resonate with this game that messes with my perception of the game. But I'm glad I revisited one of my favorite games, even if I see its flaws more than before. And damn, I just realized we didn't talk about replayability in this game. Well, there is none. And that's my view on Atelier Iris 2, a game that many people didn't play but should, especially if you enjoy JRPGs. And if you've made it this far, then thank you for watching. This has been a long project for a game like this, but I hope you all had a good time with me, and drop a sub if you did. And if you want to help the channel and my ever-growing addiction to gaming, then you can become a member of the channel here on YouTube. That helps me to get the games to be able to talk about them on the channel. And even if you don't, I'm just glad you spent the time with me as I discussed one of my favorite games. And as always, happy gaming.